Money doesn't just come from one place. It drips, trickles, flows, and floods into our lives in different ways. Welcome to Drip Trickle Flow Flood, a podcast that explores the power of multiple income streams. All right, Tony, we've got a solo episode here. You sent me this
Yeah, how are you?
article from Fortune. How you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you? I know you are deadline now.
Yes. Unfortunately, everything comes at once.
That's
And my husband was like, why did you do that to yourself? I'm like, I didn't do it. It just happens because these deadlines are imposed. They're not always personally given. So anyway,
I
yeah.
I think that's the nature. I was at the doctor, I don't know, a year and a half ago or something, and he goes, "Oh, your blood pressure's a little high, blah blah blah." And I go, "Yeah, I'm pretty busy, whatever." And he goes, "Yep, you know what they say: if you want something done, give it to the busy person."
Oh,
You know,
that's true.
and it is, right?
Oh, no.
Yeah. So I expect
Wow.
people will keep sending you stuff, Melissa, because they know you'll get it done.
Well,
Yeah,
now
let's
I
talk
feel like I
about
just got
fortune.
some therapy. Maybe we need a whole episode on that in the future. Why the busy ones get all the work. But no, this is a good topic. You sent me this article, Tony. It's a Fortune article called Home Sellers Are So Fed Up with Cutting Listing Prices, They're Just Yanking Their Homes Off the Market Altogether. So basically, it's that delistings have gone up about 47% year over year. And sellers are pulling their homes off the market because they're not getting the desired price. And so it's looking at that from a higher level view. Is this a sign of desperation or is this a strategic move? So you obviously are the real estate mogul here, Tony. So I'm so curious to hear like what your thought is on this. And if you're wanting to share, are you experiencing this? Are your colleagues experiencing this?
Yeah,
Talk
so
about
it's a really interesting phenomenon, and I'll start off by saying when you look at things nationally, that doesn't necessarily represent individual markets. I know that Florida is having a tough time right now. It sounds like Arizona, Las Vegas, and maybe some areas in Texas are struggling, where the Midwest and Northeast are not seeing that and actually have some pretty, especially the Midwest is still slow and steady chugging along. So this isn't going to necessarily be everywhere. The West Coast, I think, is probably feeling it a little bit. There was this idea of it used to be people would buy houses, sell houses, and it was pretty common that if you listed a house and you didn't get your asking price, that you'd probably make some sort of concession and lower the price. I think some mentality over the last 10 years is that real estate only goes up and that I'm going to buy this and I'm going to make a bunch of money. And so that mentality around it only goes up, which is just simply not true. Over time, real estate does appreciate with inflation and different ways. But if you look at it in small pieces, it certainly does go down at times or stay flat at times. And it's interesting, the psychology behind this is that people are not really willing to accept that. And what it's doing is it's making it really hard for transactions to happen because home values shot up. People bought at a high price with a low interest rate, with the mortgage that the math worked because of the low interest rate. That's trapping people a little bit because they can't sell and give up that low interest rate. But the other thing is the prices did shoot up. They outpaced inflation in a lot of markets. Cost of housing definitely was outpacing wage growth. And so you combine that with now interest rates higher, the buyers just simply can't afford it. And this phenomenon of scarcity in the real estate market, when there has been more listings coming on the market, creating a supply, but that supply doesn't help if the buyers can't afford it and the sellers are saying, nope, I planned on making X on my house and that's all there is to it. So it's a really interesting psychological situation going on here with the real estate market.
That's interesting. So where do you think that came from, that that belief? Like, why has that belief shifted where people think it just goes up, up now
Well,
instead of the roller coaster that most things are?
yeah, I think that social media and when I got into real estate, there was very few resources out there to learn from. There were a couple books here and there. Podcasts weren't a thing. There wasn't that many places to go to. Maybe there was a radio show or something. We just weren't learning that much. Now there are so many people on Instagram, on TikTok, bragging about making so much money. There's people out there talking about 10x your life. There's podcasts dedicated strictly to home investing. And not that those things are necessarily bad. I think having all that information is fantastic. I love the education piece about it. But we also saw a really strange economic time period where we had one of the worst economic dips in the nation's history in 2008 to 2010. And then we started climbing out of it very steadily. So we had that dip and we start coming out of that dip. And then right when we probably should have had things temper or maybe even another little dip or something, COVID happened and supercharged it. And so it created this 15-year run or 14-year run at least that was unprecedented. And it's tough to remember before 14 years ago, the thing. And some people didn't know anything about it. And so that is, I think, a big part of it is just a lack of understanding the whole situation. And I think it's pitting buyers and sellers against each other. It used to be they were working towards the same goal of this person wants to sell their home and this person wants to buy their home. Great, let's find a match. Now it's like this person wants to make X and this person can only afford Y. And it's just not marrying up in a lot of situations.
Yeah, that's interesting. And definitely the pandemic was an interesting time. I know we had 2 investment properties at the time we sold at the top of the market during then for different reasons, but partially because we knew we could get more. The prices had gone up so much that we were shocked we could get that much for a pretty basic home 2 basic homes that we owned back east. So, yeah, it is interesting and also interesting how it's playing out regionally. So for some of the states that maybe we are or aren't seeing this, what are some other factors that you're seeing? So I know Florida is, I think, experiencing some issues with insurance. Like sometimes the home insurance is so high that people are completely priced out just because of that.
Yeah, that's a big part of it is insurance has gotten so expensive in Florida and just it's been a challenging place to live for a lot of people with hurricane after hurricane.
Getting
And
displaced.
and I think there was a lot of people flooded into that market. There's probably people that didn't understand the market, maybe didn't understand the environment. And so now people are leaving there. The Midwest, and I'm not an expert on national real estate, but the Midwest is that slow and steady. It didn't have like a giant jump as some of the places have. But it appears that people are really enjoying living there and it's just steadily chugging along. I think other areas, Arizona and Vegas, they might be feeling the fact that they just built so much. There was a lot of very easy place to build compared to, I guess, up here where we're sandwiched in between mountains and water.
There's everything's an issue here.
Not a lot of great land to build on, kind of a thing where
everything's very wet.
Wet and steep and setbacks where if you're in the desert, as long as you have water, everything's pretty flat. I think that may be an aspect of that. And it's also, those are places where a lot of people dove in pretty aggressively. I think a lot of vacation rentals, a lot of all sorts of things. And so
it's true too.
Yeah. So it's interesting, but it's something to watch, whether you're on the buy side or the sell side of what is the psyche, what is going on nationally, because it does impact everything. And then paying attention to interest rates, because I think that will impact things, but also understanding that, yes, buying with a low interest rate, it might be the right decision. Locking in that inexpensive money, it can be a great value. And then there can be a big upside to that. But also understanding that everything is cyclical. And if you're buying at the top of the market with a low interest rate, that might not be the best time to buy. Maybe interest rates tick up, the market softens, you can get a better deal. Maybe that is it to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars at the lot interest payments.
Yes.
And you can always refinance that loan. So yeah, maybe that interest rate is higher for a few years, but if you're talking about a 30-year mortgage, having to pay a higher interest rate for a few years with the hopes of with interest rates dropping. Now, I don't know. I think interest rates will drop. Now, they're really still they're really pretty average right now. They're actually not that
Mhm.
high, maybe slightly, but they're not the 12% of the 80s or anything. So,
Oof. Yeah. What is
yeah,
it, like 6 or 7 right now? Somewhere
yeah, and I've
there?
heard
Yeah.
people actually they're bringing back 5-1 arms and some different
Oh.
things, which
Mhm.
a 5-1 arm is basically it's a variable rate loan that is fixed for 5 years, and then it's a variable rate after that. So that was really bad during the financial crisis. A lot of people got stung by that.
Yes.
So you do want to be very careful with that. If interest rates are going to be going down, though, it isn't necessarily a bad situation for you. So there are ways, and I've heard of those getting into the high fives
Mm.
for primary residence. So they have ticked down a little bit, but you do have loan origination fees, and there are costs to getting a loan and refinancing. But I think that is something people really do need to pay attention to. Is just because the math works on that monthly payment doesn't mean it's a great purchase. You really do need to look at the whole picture and look at what's happening. I think interest rates are going to go down just because everybody is pushing it so hard, even though the economic indicators are they're just like right there that everything should hold. I do think that at least as soon as the beginning of next year, when the Fed chairman position will change, I think we'll definitely start seeing some interest rate cuts then, if not before. Like we preach on this, right? Get educated.
Yes, get educated. And then from the seller side, it seems like there's a little bit of diversification, meaning what is happening on that side and what is the smartest move strategically. So, according to the article, a lot of people are just delisting only to potentially relist later. So that is their quote unquote strategy. But then there are other sellers who are potentially just holding, right? And they're just like make sense to rent it out versus trying to sell it right now. And then maybe some other sellers are renovating or thinking about like, how can we increase the price of this or other ways we can make money on the land? So, what would you say around that? If you're in that position where you want to sell, you're not getting the price that you want to sell it for. Like, what other types of flows might be able to, or drips or trickles might be able to emerge from that property?
Yeah. I mean, on the West Coast here, specifically in Washington, there's been a lot of density. And I think Oregon had this a few years ago that a lot more density is being allowed. There's new rules coming through the pipeline in Washington to allow essentially multifamily on single family lots. And you need to look into it. It's different areas and different properties and different city sizes and all play a factor. And then different cities, Bellingham, which is the city that we live closest to, is all in on this and allowing basically non-owner occupied accessory dwelling units, ADUs. So in essence, making these lots multifamily. So if you have a lot that would allow for an ADU, you could build that. And sometimes, again, looking at it, even if you're not getting rent increases, which a lot of properties are still getting rent increases, multifamily is struggling a little bit. Single family seems to be still pretty strong. If you're in that situation and you go, oh my gosh, I'm not getting my 5% rent increase here, and my taxes went up, and my insurance went up, and my utilities went up, and all these things, and I had to replace a hot water heater. I just want to sell this dumb thing. Trust me, I've been there.
Me
I've
too.
felt that. I can totally relate with that. But to have a cool head and say, okay, maybe this means I'm making $1,000 less this year. And that's we're probably not talking a huge number, but or I could sell it and I can get what I can get. Or if you make a little bit less, your capitalization rate is a little lower. in 2025 or 2026, but then your appreciation is a lot better, and if because you sell in 2027 and the market's stronger, you might be trading a few $1,000s here to make $10,000, $20,000 in the future. And that's where having a good team, and if you can find a real estate agent that is really educated on this stuff, then that's great. If you have a financial advisor or a banker or really friends, family, spouses, podcast hosts, whatever it is that can help work through these things, because there's no one right answer, right? The loan you have in place, the area you are in the country, the type of property you have, your specific financial situation, all has an impact. But just making sure that you're seeing the trees through the forest. Is that how it goes, or is I see the forest through the trees through the forest?
Or wait,
I don't know the way that quote goes, but if you're seeing the bit,
as two, I just choked. As two writers, we're both like, wait,
but that you're seeing the whole
let's
picture.
Google it.
Yeah, so I don't know, but I think paying attention. I think this is just very interesting that there's a psychological sentiment going on in the country right now with a little bit of financial just uneasiness. Real estate isn't behaving how a lot of people thought it would. And so just paying attention to that as you're looking to buy or sell on either side of it, or if you're renting, choosing to rent or not rent, which we talked about in the past. I think being aware of all this stuff is important, and understanding that just because it's this way now doesn't mean it's going to be that way in 6 months or a year or 3 years or whatever that time horizon is.
And it's can't see the forest for the trees, which is you're too deep in like the granular details and you can't grasp the big pictures. I can't.
There we go. That's what I was trying to get across.
Google it. Okay. This was a good, very interesting article. I'm glad that you brought it up, Tony. And for all of our listeners as well, we may not always have the answers, but if you have a question about anything like this around real estate, we are taking questions on our podcast. We'll do our best to answer, or at least pull up some education for you. So don't ever feel embarrassed to send in questions, especially about real estate. And with that said, if you enjoyed this episode of Drip Trickle Flow Flood, please rate us and review us on your favorite podcast platform. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.